Hello, everyone. Welcome on this beautiful Wednesday. Naomi, I just realized I just got dry cleaning and I put it all on my table to go through and hang up. And I just realized I forgot to do that. So, hello to everybody. Welcome. It's Naomi, myself, and my dry cleaning. So, we're all three going to hang out today. But welcome to everyone joining us now. We are having our Ask the Experts this Wednesday. It's always good to see you. We're here every Wednesday at 12 Eastern. I bring on different guests, people that have expertise in certain areas that want to talk about a specific topic and share their knowledge and expertise with us, as well as general OCD comments and questions that we take. So if you're new to us, regardless of what stream you're on, we have X, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, and iocdf.org/live. So we have a lot of different live streams going all at once. So wherever you're from, watching from, just say hi. Tell us you're here. Let us know where you're watching from. Who are you here to support? And of course, this is your stream, so you can ask any questions at any time. We're going to talk about a topic for a little bit at the start, but we'll definitely be jumping into your questions for a lot of the stream. So welcome. My name is Chris Trondsen. I'm with the IOCDF Board of Directors, and I am a person with lived experience with OCD, as well as a licensed clinician treating OCD and related disorders. A couple quick announcements before I introduce our guest. First and foremost, like I said, this is streaming on all different platforms, so please be a community, jump in, chime in, interact with each other. It's always good to see people in the chat interacting. Second, though, we can't be a crisis hotline. We are definitely here to offer support and knowledge and information and education, but we can't jump in if you're in a crisis situation. So if you are struggling, please either dial 988, go to 988lifeline.org. You can also dial 911 or go to your local emergency room. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. We can't do that for you, but if you are really in need of a clinician, the IOCDF has a great Find Help feature at iocdf.org/find-help. And you can definitely go there and find a licensed clinician in your area and really help you. But we're happy to have this stream and be supportive and offer what we can. The only other announcements is if you are a Spanish speaker or if somebody in your life is a Spanish speaker, we have the Spanish speaking conference coming up. It's in person as well as virtual. So if you head over to iocdf.org/conferences, you'll have a list of different conferences. And the first one, I believe it's September 24th and 25th, which is coming up. So if you are interested, please check that out. And it's OCD Awareness Week coming up, the full second week of October as well. So the IOCDF is going to be offering a lot of really exciting things. All right. Well, I am so excited to share my guest with you all. So I am going to read Naomi's background, and then we are going to get started. So Naomi Torres-Mackie is a PhD, and she is a Brooklyn and Hudson Valley-based psychologist who focuses on the integration of wellness into everyday life. Dr. Torres-Mackie practices clinically as a supervising psychologist at Lenox Hill Hospital with specializations in severe mental health conditions, women's mental health, reproductive mental health, and trauma resiliency. She is also the Chief Clinical Officer at the Mental Health Coalition, a nonprofit based on ending the devastating stigma around mental health. Woohoo! Dr. Torres-Mackie teaches in the doctoral and master programs of psychology at Columbia University and has had prior teaching appointments at St. Francis College and the City College of New York. Dr. Torres-Mackie is a co-founder of Nascent Counseling, which utilizes psychology approaches to improve the wellness of organizations and the people within them. She earned her doctorate from Columbia University, where she completed a dissertation on stigma management and strength construction. Dr. Torres-Mackie has presented numerous times at leading psychology conferences on her research related to gender roles, intersectionality, and stigma. She's also the author of Psychology Today column, Underdog Psychology, and regularly contributes as an expert source in media outlets such as Good Morning America, the New York Times, CNN, HuffPost, Time, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post. Welcome, Naomi. How you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you for that mouthful and that amazing introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Really excited for our topic today. Yeah, I think it's going to be great.
Yes, and I'm excited about this topic. We talked a little bit and have lived experience with this, but I also have a lot of clients dealing with this. Before we jump in, so if you're just joining us right now, please go ahead and put in the chat. I see people jumping in. Let us know where you're joining us from. Ask your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about the topic, but definitely dedicate the second half to your questions. We have pre-submitted, we have live questions. So if you're just joining us, please get those questions in. We'll get to them in the order that we receive them. But today, the topic that you and I are going to discuss, Naomi, is something that is going to impact a lot of people watching the stream, both live and watching it back. Most people with OCD, I remember when I was doing my thesis in grad school, I wrote a lot about the impacts of OCD. And one of the things that I found stats around is that about a third of people with OCD won't work because of how much OCD impacts their ability to focus at the job, get up, get to the job, etc. So why is this topic, workplace mental health, so important for both the OCD community, but a lot of the people watching also have diagnosed depression and anxiety, etc. Why is this such an important topic in your work?
Yeah. Well, mental health is something that touches everybody. We also bring our full selves to work. So when we go to work, we bring everything with us. We may present different aspects of ourselves, but everything comes with us, our physical health, our mental well-being, it's all there in the workplace. So addressing it is important because it'll be there whether or not we like it, right? So also, at the Mental Health Coalition, we believe that addressing mental health and mental health in the workplace benefits everybody because we all have mental health, whether or not you have a clinical diagnosis or a mental health condition. Everybody experiences things like stress, burnout, workplace social anxiety, or performance anxiety. And when these things are addressed, employees do better. They're happier, they're more productive, team collaboration improves, the whole workplace becomes a healthier place. And then, we're here to talk about OCD in the workplace more specifically. I'm also a huge advocate for being specific whenever we can. And like I said, everybody brings their whole self to work. So if you have an OCD diagnosis or symptoms, those are coming with you to work. And within the umbrella of mental health and mental health conditions, there are very specific experiences, that are unique to the experience of OCD. There are also, as you heard in my bio, I think a lot about stigma and the impact of stigma. And there's mental health stigma. And then there's also specific stigmas to mental health conditions, the various conditions. And so there are, unfortunately, specific assumptions and specific stigma related to OCD. And also, unfortunately, that plays out in the workplace. So if we're not thinking, very specifically about OCD specifically in the workplace, we can kind of miss the mark on what we're addressing and how we're addressing it, whether or not it comes to accommodations for OCD or, thinking through the experience of folks with OCD in the workplace, or like I said, stigma and assumptions related to OCD in particular.
Yeah, and what I like what you said about it is like OCD comes with us, right? And I think what's so difficult is everybody's OCD impacts them in a different way. And a lot of people, it's already a struggle just to get up and to get there. But also, there can be a lot of shame if people don't understand OCD at the workplace, whether the person's doing physical compulsions that are observable to their coworkers or mental compulsions. So they're kind of checked out. A lot of times people don't really know OCD always so well. So people are getting kind of deemed something, or why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you, doing that? I also see a lot of clients that overwork because they have perfectionism. So they're there hours late. So what are some common difficulties that you hear about and you see with people with OCD in the workplace? Maybe start there, and then we could talk a little bit about some tips for solving those.
Absolutely. And I would add a very similar caveat to what you added, which is that everybody's experience is unique and different and specific to them. And at the same time, there are some general experiences that tend to be difficult in the workplace for folks with OCD. And yeah, I can absolutely speak to those. So what we see a lot, and this is from clinical experience and also what's in the research, part of what you mentioned, Chris, but intrusive thoughts serving as distractions, that comes up, a good amount in the workplace. Shame Absolutely. I think shame is a major part of most mental health conditions, and certainly OCD. And then when someone is in the workplace, the expectation, of professionalism and kind of this separation of your personal world and your professional world. And there can be a lot of shame around sharing the aspects of your OCD experience. So whether or not that's intrusive thoughts or compulsions, rituals, these types of things. And that shame itself can get in the way of the work that you're carrying out in the workplace or relationships at work, with colleagues, etc. What else? Rituals either before work or compulsions that can lead to tardiness or absence at work. And then also rituals that are carried out at work that can be time consuming and take away from, from your tasks at work. What else? Anxiety. OCD falls underneath the umbrella of an anxiety condition. So anxiety itself gets in the way of our mental processes and the ability to focus, to absorb information, to convey and relay information. And so all of these aspects of anxiety can happen at work. And then also for folks with OCD, I've seen this a lot, but developing workplace specific anxieties. There might also be triggers for certain compulsions in the workplace. And there might even be, avoidance as a coping mechanism, avoidance of those triggers in the workplace. And so, if you're avoiding certain things in the workplace, it can make it difficult to carry out what you need to carry out at work. And then perfectionism, as you mentioned, over-checking. These are things that can, be both major assets for work and quality of work, but also kryptonite at the very same time. Anything that is helpful on one level, if overdone, becomes unhelpful. And that goes for, I think, everything in life. But, checking the quality of your work, mentally reviewing tasks that are already done, seeking reassurance from colleagues. These are things that, both take time and can be distracting. Those are some of the main ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I know. I know for me, prior to treatment, I was working at, for me, a lot of my OCD impacted my sleep. And I had gone to film school, and I was working in the field. I was working for a production company that worked on commercials and like short films and stuff. But because of OCD, I was getting to bed at 2:33 in the morning, and call time would be at 6. And so, on our breaks, I was like going into finding like parts on set where I could like fall asleep. Or I remember prior to that, when I was still in school and I was working a job at a restaurant, it was like, I had to go and wash my hands in between touching everybody's plate. And so it's just exhausting, and you're trying so hard to hold it together because you want to do the work. And I think that's the tough thing, is that there's demands that a work has. And I feel like of all the things, school, volunteer, but work itself, you don't always have a lot of flexibility. There's certain demands that work has. And there's a lot of people in positions of power, unfortunately, that are still not educated on mental health. And so you have some great bosses that are working with you and understand, and then you have some that don't. I know for me, treatment was what helped. What are some of the things that you find that how can people, if they're in a job watching right now, and I was going to say in the chat, some people have already kind of commented on the topic, so we'll put that on the screen in a second. But if you're watching, let us know, like, how has OCD impacted your job? What have been some struggles or some things you've had to overcome, some challenges? Naomi, for people watching, I think sometimes people feel like I have to be perfectly better before I can go get a job. And that's kind of hard. They might have financial demands. So how can people use treatment and their mental health wellness to work on, what are some of the tips that really help them work through some of that so that they can strive at work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think knowledge is power. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So knowing your rights, knowing yourself, and what your own, symptomology, your own experience with OCD looks like, outside of work and inside of work, also knowing that that can shift over time. And so a continued awareness of what that's looking like for you is really important. But yeah, going back to knowledge is power there. So if you have an OCD diagnosis, you are protected under ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. And so you are entitled to accommodations at work. I don't want to pretend like it's so easy. You ask for an accommodation and you'll get it and there'll be no friction. I mean, sometimes that happens and that's wonderful because there's various, across workplaces, there's varying degrees of understanding and support around mental health. And sometimes that happens, but the reality is often, like you said, Chris, there is a lack of understanding and knowledge, unfortunately. And so that's, again, why I say knowledge is power, knowledge is power, knowledge is power. And knowing, what some of the common accommodations are that we see those given to those, who have OCD. I think that's very important. And so I'll list some now. This is not an exhaustive list, but just for those watching to know, that we see these accommodations given all the time, and it is fully reasonable to request them because you are entitled to them if it would be helpful to you. So flexible work hours and working remotely, modified or frequent breaks, dedicated workspace or private workspace, noise reduction, that could be headphones, it could be white noise machine, requesting written instructions that can reduce some anxiety around tasks or the need to seek constant reassurance around instructions. Task restructuring is another one. An example of that is dividing tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. Anything related to OCD and anxiety, we know smaller, more bite-sized is easier to digest, so to speak. Supportive supervision, that's a major one. So you are entitled to supervision and that could be peer supervision, could be supervision from a boss, but supervision that is understanding and affirming of you and what you're experiencing. And then organization and like time management tools, also an accommodation I've seen. That could be a digital calendar or like certain apps that can help with time management and can help with things like excessive checking. Recording meetings is another accommodation we see. Service animals is another one. And then a big one that, feels like, well, of course, but not everyone necessarily knows, but access to mental health support and services. That can even include time off. And I've written many letters for this, but 45 minutes to an hour off during the workday, because that's usually when clinicians work. And so getting an accommodation to have that time, even during work hours, to see your therapist, especially now that we have, online and remote psychotherapy and telehealth. So anyway, going back to your question, Chris, I know I'm putting a lot out there, but knowing
that was really good. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think also on a more, that's kind of procedural, right? Like these are the accommodations we tend to see. Know your rights, know you can ask for them, and you should be able to receive them. I think also what I'm about to say is a luxury and a privilege, but if you are able to choose your work environment, thinking through what tends to trigger OCD symptoms for you, and trying to find a work environment that works with your symptoms, works with your triggers, not against them. So, work environment or a certain type of work that creates less stress and is less triggering for you, and whatever that means and looks like, and thinking through that. If you are in a job search or looking to change your work environment, that's an important one. I also think self-compassion is underrated and so important. I mean, for humans generally, but certainly in what we're talking about with OCD and OCD in the workplace. I can send a link to this, but at the Mental Health Coalition, we have a roadmap, which is a free online guide, but a roadmap to developing self-love, which is essentially self-compassion. But I see that as a tool, basically, for supporting yourself and doing well generally, and certainly in the workplace. Going along with that, also, as much as you can, minimizing tasks on harder days. Folks with OCD sometimes have what I call is like flare-ups, harder days, harder weeks, harder months, easier days, easier weeks, easier months, and that's okay. These things wax and wane. And as much as you can, go easier on yourself. Again, minimize tasks. If you have a supportive boss or colleagues, kind of cluing them in, letting them know you need to kind of go lighter now, you can go heavier, when you're not having a hard day. That's very important. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, Chris, is treatment. Treatment is so important. So beginning or continuing treatment. There's various treatment options. The ones that are kind of gold standard for OCD specifically, ERP, exposure response prevention, medication management, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, MCBT, mindfulness-based CBT, also psychodynamic psychotherapy, a mix of these things. We've seen all of them be helpful and successful. And OCD symptoms can certainly be a pain, maybe putting it lightly, but they are treatable and manageable, especially with good treatment.
Yeah, no, like you said with the treatment, I mean, I could see myself before treatment just really struggling. And I know after treatment, I got myself back in the workplace slowly, and I got a job at a gym. And I utilized that job to continue to get better in treatment. So, for instance, I had harm OCD, and one of my big fears was I would re-rack the weights. That was kind of one of my roles, and I was always afraid. I was like at first trying to push the weights as far as they'd go in the plates because I was so afraid. What if I didn't push it all the way and it falls on someone's ankle and they injure themselves? I also had contamination, so grabbing people's keys and scanning them really bothered me. I was volunteering at an animal shelter, so I was really afraid of like animal-borne illnesses. What if I get bit and get rabies or something else? But I think what's great about treatment is you can use these like real life situations that there's a barrier from you to really thrive and enjoy your work. And so, I was always the one that was like, I'll re-rack the weights, and practicing just pushing it once and moving on, or grabbing keys, because I had the option of kind of putting the thing up on the counter and people scan themselves. But I'm like, no, I need to get better grabbing their keys, or volunteering with the animals. I wanted to throw Nathan's comment on and kind of get your perspective. And then I also want to circle back to something you said that I thought was important. Nathan at 1208 says, I can handle working a job that is moderately stressful. One of the things that I did to kind of work myself back up is started by volunteering at an animal shelter because I felt less pressure. I could kind of get my bearings about me. And then the gym, it was less stressful. And then ultimately went on to work, in a different field than gyms. But when people are saying like I can work a job moderately stressful, do you feel like that's a good start for people? Like if people haven't been working or they're struggling to kind of aim to look for a job that, hey, I want to thrive in, I want to be able to make some successes, versus trying to go like some people try to go back into their old field, but they might not be there yet. And I feel sometimes they get disappointed and it kind of burns them out.
Yes, absolutely. And Chris, by the way, I'm so glad that you're sharing your experiences, and thank you for that. And yes, 100%. So I mentioned ERP, exposure response prevention therapy. It's a mouthful. Basically, the word exposure is the most important one in that mouthful. And what you're talking about, Chris, is exposure. So we can use the workplace as exposure, not therapy, but exposure treatment. And I'll try to not get too technical here, but basically, with exposure treatment or therapy, you can picture a ladder. And you want to start with smaller, more manageable, kind of exposing yourself to things that might trigger an intrusive thought or a compulsion or a ritual. But it's manageable. It's in that moderate range. It's not too easy. It's not like you would just blow right through it and it wouldn't trigger anything. It's going to, it's going to trigger that feeling in you, but you can manage it. That's the bottom level of the ladder. And with exposure, you want to gradually climb the ladder. You want to set yourself up for success. You don't want to start all the way at the top of the ladder, which in the workplace, what that translates to is what you're saying, Chris, is you don't want to jump right back in, to a highly triggering environment or something that is going to be extremely stressful, for your OCD symptoms. If possible, definitely start at that moderate, like easy to moderate level, and get comfortable with that, like you did with volunteering. I think that's amazing. And then, when essentially there's it's Emerson or Thoreau, I always forget, but there's a quote like oh no, I'm forgetting it. It's kind of like when you do something, the death of fear is certain. So, and same thing applies for OCD and OCD treatment, is the more you do something, the more kind of acclimated you get to it, in theory, and the symptoms decrease. And so that ladder, ERP, how you're approaching work, it all goes back to, again, practicing with tasks, with environments that are moderately challenging. You kind of master that. Symptoms decrease, you're able to tolerate, you're able to manage any of the compulsions or thoughts that are triggered in those environments, and then you can step up to the next rung in the ladder, and then all of a sudden that ladder feels moderate, and then as you're continuing to expose yourself, that feels easy, and then you go to the next one, and then hopefully all of a sudden you're at the top of the ladder. You're doing what, a year ago would have seemed impossible or just too triggering or too challenging. Basically, all that's to say, baby steps.
Yeah, and that's how I felt, and it really worked for me, is to start at the animal shelter, increase the amount of time. Then I got a job at at a gym, and then it was like same thing. It's like I started out working twice a week at 4-hour shifts, and then I became assistant operations, and then I did nights and weekends, and then operations, and then I did, I just kept moving up, and my responsibilities would increase, which meant more triggers. But because it was done systematically, like you're talking about, I never felt overwhelmed. What I wanted to circle back to is about ADA and about rights. Unfortunately, at this gym, I had a really bad incident. I was switching my medication at the time, and it was making me extremely tired. And so my psychiatrist did reach out to my boss and explain, he's going on a medication change. He's a little bit tired. He doesn't really need any accommodations, but just want to give you a heads up. But the way it affected me the most is my breaks. I could keep my energy during the shift, and on my breaks, I would go to my car and I'd have to sleep for like the 15 or 30 minutes. And for whatever reason, my boss just hated that I would sleep in my car on my break. I don't know why it bothered her so much. So I even like drove my car to the other side of it was like in a big shopping center, to the other side of the shopping center. I even went into a neighborhood, and I even took off my work shirt and put on a traditional shirt to just nap, because it was the only way I could keep my energy going. And she ended up letting me go. No write-ups, anything. I was very fortunate with the ADA. I reached out to HR, and my psychiatrist luckily kind of backed me up and explained to them the ADA had protections. They had already alerted my boss, and ultimately I was reinstated. And it was very fortunate for me that my boss was actually moved to a different region, so I didn't have to interact with that person. But if I didn't know my rights, and I only knew it from my psychiatrist, I would have just taken the fired. And I think it would have also crushed me, because I was so proud of myself to like go to work and like challenge myself. And I really looked at work as an opportunity to thrive in my recovery. And so that was a really bad hit. And I think with my psychiatrist and the ADA protecting me and getting my job back, it kind of ended well for me, but I know it doesn't end well for others. So when you were talking about the accommodations and ADA, what is the best way for people to go about that? Is it involving a psychiatrist, or is it involving their therapist? Do they talk to the boss or HR directly? What do you seem in general seems to be the best kind of order of operations?
I think those are all really good options. And I could be wrong about this, but I don't think that there's any one kind of chain of command, or, I think you can certainly go to HR. You can certainly, hopefully you do have a clinician, whether or not that is a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist for med management, or even a PCP, if whatever clinician is involved in your care. So HR, clinicians, and a boss or any other, I guess we could say, ally in the workplace, if there is somebody in your workplace who understands more, and can be on your side around this. I think looping just, there's also, power in numbers. So looping in somebody else, again, who can be an ally for you, with you, I think is important. And knowledge is power. I'll say it forever, but your own knowledge around ADA and sharing that with your boss, with whoever is handling accommodations, is really important. And yeah, I don't think there's any right or wrong way to go about this. I think you have to do what works best for you and in your specific situation and environment, right? So one person might already have a good relationship with HR, and so they might feel like, I'm going to loop HR and I'm going to go to them and they can be on my side and help me figure this out. Another person, HR might be like this black hole that doesn't feel safe or familiar or anything. So looping in an ally, a colleague, if you have multiple bosses, looping in one of your bosses, or directly using ADA, even if that's printing out some information and handing it to your boss at work. And I would say, again, knowing your rights, knowing that you're entitled to them, and trying to stay within your own experience, right? So and also, by the way, Chris, I am so disappointed and angry on your behalf that you had that experience. Unfortunately, I'm also not shocked. I've heard about these types of experiences many times as a psychologist with my clients, and it's so disheartening, and it's not uncommon. And I think, and I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking clinically from what I've heard from some of my clients, is it can be really easy to kind of slip into the mind of, let's say, the boss, right? If your boss is not understanding around these things, and downplay your own experience. And so I think it's really important to remember, you are right. You do deserve, in your case, those breaks and that rest time. You do deserve any of the accommodations or the things that you need at work. And just because somebody doesn't understand that, it doesn't mean you're wrong. They're wrong. Right. And so I think remembering that to help with your, sense of agency around these things is so important.
Yeah, no, thank you for your kind words. And I think what was the most confusing and frustrating is I didn't even ask for additional breaks. I mean, I think I'm so glad you're speaking because and you're our guest today, because I think if I would have known, I would have asked for those extra breaks. But I wasn't even doing extra breaks, or I wasn't even taking extra time on my breaks. I was literally, to me, I'm like, if I'm an employer and my employee has an hour break, if they want to go hike a mountain, if they want to go scuba dive, if they want to eat tacos, if they want to go see their kids, if they want to walk their dog, to me, it's your break. If you want to travel the world and be back in the 60 minutes, do you, right? And that's what was so shocking is, and I just didn't understand it. And I was so fortunate to have a psychiatrist that was like, hey, this isn't fair. But like you said, there's so many people that don't understand. And I think in general, going back to the conversation about stigma, in general, there's so much mental health stigma. And in my thesis, one of the things that I looked at with research is how it affects us, those of us with the disorder. And just like you said, we start to downplay our experience, or we start to question ourselves, or we start to say, no, I don't really think I need that, or that's not being fair, because that's what we hear from other people. And I think as organizations and clinicians like you keep speaking out, I'm hoping people are hearing that. I'm proud that people are going to work and doing what they love. And if you need some support during that process, it's important to do that. But I think, like you said, a lot of times, especially if a boss or a company seems to not have that culture of support, people do start to hide or downplay their stuff because they're like, oh, I don't even think my company cares, or they might say something, or maybe I'm being too needy, and it affects us as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I hear from clients and patients about those, thoughts and feelings all the time. And I do hope, that if that has been your experience, people in your life, whether or not it's your personal life or clinicians in your life, again, the idea of self-advocacy. I hope that they can help kind of serve as a reminder of, again, the thing of like, oh, no, the other person is wrong, right? Like, and I am right, and I deserve these things, and my experience is valid. And I wanted to add one more thing too around like what you can do and who to go to, HR, clinicians, etc. And again, what I said before about the importance of specificity, but letters. I have written so many letters, and I love writing letters because it's a form, it's a tangible thing. As a clinician, a lot of what I do is so intangible, and letters. And I share this because I think the clients I've written them for, when I'm like excited to write them a letter, they're always like shocked. And there's a lot of just, I have, heard that there's a lot of discomfort and like not wanting to inconvenience their clinician, put anything else on their plate, etc. But like, your clinician is there for you and because they want to help you. And so I do think asking for a letter, addressing any sort of discomfort that you might have around that. And I just hope it's helpful to hear from a psychologist that is a really actually great part of our job, because it is something tangible that we can do, to help our clients get what they need. Because we can do that all day in the therapy room, but then letters to bosses, to the workplace, is a form of advocacy and a way, of helping beyond the box of the therapy room. And I've never seen a letter fail. Knock on wood is the other thing. And so they are very useful. They're easy for clinicians to do. And I think, they can be powerful. So hopefully that's a helpful, nugget there.
There was a good comment by Cash, who has OCD, and they were saying that it wasn't their mental health that stopped them from working. It was hard to work mentally, but it was also their physical health. And I think that's something too. You were talking about intersectionality. It's like, mental health can already make, like in Cash's case, it already challenging to work. Or Nathan was saying, he lost a few jobs at 1209. He was saying, I lost a few jobs because I couldn't work fast enough because of OCD. So sometimes there's like a strain, but that's a good point that Cash makes, is that, it may not, somebody could be dealing with physical, but they could also be dealing with mental health, but physical at the same time, or an illness or a loss of a family member. And I think that's the hard thing is, people can maybe, if they're not dealing with a mental health struggle, they have enough energy in them to deal with like the physical or that. But when you're already straining, like Cash is talking about, Nathan's talking about with work, mental health, now the physical health can come in, or these other things can come up, and your bucket is just too full. And it goes back to just what you were talking about, is advocating for yourself, understanding like what you need in that time, and being able to articulate that. And I think it's hard because I know as a person with it, at those jobs, you do feel so small, and you feel like, nobody, and some people get these great bosses that are compassionate and not, but I'm just glad you've been talking about just what people can do. I want to throw out a pre-submitted question, and this is very specific, so we don't have to talk about the specifics, but somebody wrote, my OCD is on fire today. My job was eliminated due to federal funding cuts. Last day is Friday. I'm really struggling. Can you talk about, maybe not specifically like cuts, but that's another difficulty, is like, somebody may be getting up and going, and they're getting that good momentum, and then there's federal cuts, or maybe there's layoffs, or their job, I had some clients that were doing so well working remotely, but then their company is requiring people to come back in person. So what is the best way for people to kind of deal with these changes, or some of this uncertainty around working, while also navigating OCD?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. It's hard to answer. I'm going to do my best. The word control comes to mind for me when there are cuts, when there's layoffs, etc. There's a loss of control, right? Like, there's nothing you can do about it. Then you're kind of thrust into this situation that's not ideal, and that might, also worsen your mental health. And I would say would be very likely actually to worsen your mental health, whether or not that's OCD symptoms, but just your general mental well-being. If you're laid off, if you lose your job, if there's cuts, that is stressful. Work is such a giant part of our lives, financially, socially, identity-wise. Ooh, yeah. So when these kinds of things happen, again, I think it goes back to loss of control and how stressful that is. And it can really kick up a lot of anxieties. Anxiety tends to live in the past and the future. It's very, if you're fully present, I say this a lot, it's really hard to be anxious. But if we're thinking ahead, if there are cuts, if you lose your job, all of a sudden you can't necessarily see the future. And that's scary. And that can kick up a lot of anxiety, which can also kick up a lot of OCD symptoms. And whenever we're in a situation like that, where loss of control, loss of ability to, metaphorically see the future, it leads to anxiety, really all you can do is focus on what's right in front of you and focus on what you can control. So, an example, you can't control the fact that you lost your job. You can control how much time tomorrow you devote to networking or working on your resume or whatever it is. And when you notice your mind going to the areas that you can't control, maybe perseverating on the actual loss of the job, etc., redirect yourself to, okay, what can I control? Even if it is something seemingly small. When it comes to control, like there really is no small thing. If you're able to control how much time, again, tomorrow you devote to a new job search or networking, that's a big thing. That's something you can control. You have full control over that. And I do think focusing on those pieces can be very helpful. I also think, one more thing I'll say, these are the moments to reach out to others for support. Doesn't matter who, well, it does matter who it is. You should reach out to somebody who provides, good, healthy, like nourishing support. But it doesn't matter who it is in terms of, it could be someone in your professional life or your personal life or treatment, it could be a clinician. But when you're in a situation, again, like layoffs, cuts, etc., where your mental health is going to take a toll, just immediately, I know it's hard to reach out for support, or can be hard, but do it. Reach out to support, even if it's just to vent. It doesn't have to be anything so big or so serious, but loop someone in so they're on the journey with you, because feeling less alone in something, it can also go a long way.
Really well said. We got a question at 12:09 from Kagan on Facebook. They said, "Can you talk about harm OCD and the best treatment for OCD?" So I know you talked a little bit earlier about the combination of ERP along with medication, CBT, mindfulness, CBT. When somebody's approaching, can you talk in the context of harm OCD? Like, what is somebody trying to utilize these frontline treatments in harm OCD to really learn and to move past that? That was from Kagan at 12:09.
Hmm. And to be clear, so harm OCD, we're talking about intrusive thoughts related to harming self or others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So frontline treatment there is still ERP and or CBT, in combination with medication management. So the research shows that in combination piece is really important. And every time I say this, I also I think it's really important to acknowledge just the context that we're in. And I'm fully aware that treatment can be hard to find, and accessible treatment can be hard to find. A lot of folks don't know about, like local community hospitals. Often the hospital I work at in New York City, offers free or sliding scale treatment, and often it doesn't matter if you have insurance. And so knowing that like hospital settings can be very accessible for treatment. And then also community mental health centers, of course, and then training institutions. So if there's a university that has a training program for clinicians, by and large, like all of the ones I know about, I can say have trainee clinicians who are fantastic, and they work under licensed clinicians, and the care is usually like, again, free or very low fee. And so I always suggest kind of seeking out those opportunities. But anyway, I'm getting into accessibility of care and treatment. Going back to treatment itself, harm OCD, it's actually the first form of OCD that I worked with clinically. And it's such a tricky one, because there can be a lot of shame and discomfort around it and stigma, and it's very misunderstood. And with harm OCD, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but I'll say it anyway. But, harm OCD, the person with these thoughts, these intrusive thoughts, they are intrusive, right? The person is distressed by these thoughts. They don't want to be having them. There's like an awareness of like, this is not something I want to do, but I'm having these thoughts and I feel like I can't stop the thoughts themselves. And so what exposure therapy can do, and CBT more generally, is you wouldn't expose yourself in a tangible way like you would if you have an elevator phobia, where you'd go and ride the elevator to the first floor and then the second floor and the third floor, etc. But you kind of expose yourself in terms like cognitively, in terms of the types of thoughts that you're having, and you work with your clinician, in addressing those and tolerating the discomfort. Like, tolerating is such a difficult skill, and an important one. Going back to what you were saying, Chris, about your own journey in the workplace, you tolerated discomfort in everything that you discussed. And so this goes for harm OCD and also OCD more generally, but like really challenging yourself to sit with this discomfort, and challenge yourself to accept that, right? That it will be uncomfortable rather than trying to avoid it. And with the clinical work I've done with harm OCD, they're often, because of the distress around the thoughts, there's often, a strong urge to avoid. And like, I don't even want to think about the fact or talk about the fact that I'm having these thoughts, because it is so distressing or shameful, etc. But I like to demystify therapy as much as I can. And like, us clinicians have heard and seen it all, heard it all. Like, these things are not going to phase us. And I do think, sharing these things with your clinician, and knowing, that we are here as a very, unjudgmental, very accepting and affirming ear and space, I think is an important and helpful reminder, because we can't address we can't shift anything if we don't acknowledge and address it first.
Yeah, no, for me, harm OCD was one of my subtypes. I also had it around certain family members. And I think the biggest thing, like you said, is avoidance. So I started avoiding those family members. Luckily, by the time I got to the gym, I was at a place in therapy that I understood, like you were saying, the object and the idea is like, I have this thing in front of me that OCD is making all kinds of claims. It also makes you feel like I'm a harmful person. And,
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that doesn't, can't be trusted. But I think one thing that I talk to my clients about is, let's look at pattern of history, right? If I have a pattern of leaving my keys on top of my car and then not being able to, or that's probably doesn't make sense because you have your keys to get in. But let's say I have a history of putting like my drink on top of the car and then driving off and the drink falls. And I've done that 10 times this year. Like, sure, it makes sense to make sure, okay, let me grab my drink and put it in my car and then get in. But for OCD, is like, I had no pattern of harming people. That wasn't something. And in fact, it was almost kind of the opposite. It's like, I was at work. I was a very cautious person, or at the animal shelter, very cautious. That's just kind of, I always wanted to make sure that when I put things on the dogs, I wasn't hurting them, or always wanted to make sure at work, like I was careful and the gym looked nice. But OCD was making me feel like I'm this uncontrollable, harmful person. And like you said, that avoidance almost reinforces that. It validates that. So when I took the opposite approach of like re-racking the weights and tolerating that discomfort and saying, look, I can't tell the future. I can only focus on the now, and I'm putting the weights away. And, I just got to hope for the best. I've done everything I can. I started learning real quickly, like, oh, there hasn't been an incident. I haven't hurt anyone. And you start to build that confidence back in yourself and start recognizing like, hey, this is a mental health condition problem. This isn't I'm a clumsy and I hurt people problem. So I think that's what I love about the treatment, is it's a teaching tool, and people learn and they start to trust themselves, their environment, the people around them, versus thinking everything is out to harm them.
Yeah, and also, Chris, this idea, so looking at the data, like you're saying, and looking at your own history, because history is the best predictor of future behavior. And then this idea of externalizing. So, and that's something, when I first started working with OCD, it was with children, which was really great work. I loved it. And externalizing your OCD. So similar to what you said, that's my OCD, it's not me. And so with the kids I worked with, and now I do this with the adults I work with who have OCD symptoms, we come up with a name for the OCD. We come with a very vivid picture of what the OCD looks like. So it could be anything from like a big red fuzzy bear to so many like fun examples. But if it is something that is almost silly in nature too, it can also like kind of take the stress out of it in a way, and add some humor and playfulness. And so, yeah, again, reminding yourself, even coming up with an image or a character, or it could just be a name for it, for your OCD again, and remembering like, okay, my OCD is telling me blah, 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 right? That's my OCD. It's a piece of my mind, and it's a piece of me, but it's not me. And I think when we give it a persona and externalize it, separate it from ourselves, it becomes a lot easier to interact with it. Because, okay, think of a postcard, right? If you have a postcard way too close to your face, it's blurry. You can't read it. If you add some distance, just like kind of distancing yourself, creating a character, a persona, or a name for your OCD, you can see it more clearly. It feels more manageable. And so, yeah, that's a technique that I think can be really helpful. You don't need a clinician to do it. You can do it yourself. It's pretty easy, and it's effective too.
Yeah. You had talked about accessibility to care, so I wanted to kind of put, we have from YouTube, FK at 1215 says, I'm from India. I was facing this problem of OCD at 12, but due to lack of awareness in the world in India, I didn't get diagnosed until I was 23. I'm now taking SSRIs. So I just want to say congratulations, FK. Like, you found the frontline medications for OCD. I know it probably was not a fun 11 years of being not diagnosed. But can you just talk about, in general, how important it is to continue to spread awareness and accessibility to care? Because I think we in the United States still see numbers staggering. Some people are fortunate, of course, to be able to get care pretty quick, but there's cases of people 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. But we also forget that the rest of the world is also dealing with OCD. So maybe with everything that the Mental Health Coalition is doing, everything that you're doing, what are kind of, I know that could be its own live stream, but what are some kind of like bullet points that you see as the future of accessibility to care, to disseminating information, et cetera, so people like FK no longer have to wait, 11 years just to get diagnosed?
Yeah, and agreed. It's unfortunate that it took 11 years, and also congratulations. Glad that it happened. And unfortunately, that's something that I hear a lot in my clinical practice. Folks dealing with these things for years before getting appropriate care. Yeah, and it's such a good question, Chris. It could be its own live stream. I'll try to be brief and bullet point here, but information is power, knowledge is power. Have I said that enough times yet in this hour? And the internet is a scary place, but the internet also has so much information, which can really empower you. And so I think one of the benefits of the digital world is, by and large, information is available, as long as we know how to weed out and look for credible sources. And I can share some, by the way. I can put those in the chat. I have some resources that are highly credible that I would suggest anybody use, that are, through the actual Mental Health Coalition, some of our partner organizations, and then IOCDF itself, amazing resources. But yeah, I think in terms of accessibility and awareness, number one, it's extremely important, because without accessibility and awareness, people struggle in silence, and conditions just continue to get worse. And so I think thinking about where can you get information, and credible information, that's an important piece. And then how can you think about treatment as maybe outside of the box, right? So there is, of course, there's psychotherapy where you sit either online or in a room for 45 minutes to an hour and you receive therapy or medication management. But then there's also treatment that looks like taking a walk around the block or in the woods or calling a supportive friend, right? Like there's other forms of what I call treatment. And I do think psychoeducation, which is essentially learning about, about things in the mental health world is psychoeducation, but that's a form of treatment. At the Mental Health Coalition, we have a resource library. So we have thousands of credible resources there that we've collected from you all and from our other partner organizations that are in one hub. So that's a resource I would definitely suggest, and that is a form of accessibility and awareness. And then, like I said, I'll add some other ones in the chat. But I do think in the digital age, one benefit of that is, over time we'll continue to see increased awareness and connecting to resources and treatment itself, right? We're able to do telehealth. Most of the clients I see are online. And so that is a really important and lovely benefit that can increase accessibility.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'll take the next question. That way it'll give you an opportunity, because what I wanted you to be able to do is share those resources. So I'll answer the question. That way you could share the resources in the chat. So Naomi's going to be putting those research in the chat for everyone. Nathan, you asked at 12:50, do we know why OCD affects some people academically and not others? OCD is really kind of impacts the things that are relevant to us and that really matter. So I know OCD affected my academia because when I finally started getting to a point where I knew, I wanted to be a therapist, and I needed to get good grades to get to a grad school and all that, suddenly I cared a lot. And so I was like, I have to get A's. If I get a B, I don't even know what I'll do with myself. It doesn't mean that other people with OCD just don't care about academia. They may still find themselves a little bit more fixated, rereading things, etc. But OCD really attacks what we care about, what's relevant, because we have to sort of give up some of our life to really zone in on those compulsive behaviors and to give our hyperfixation and focus on that. And so if it's something that's not very relevant to us, that's why some people can have different subtypes over time, because maybe when they were living here in this environment, that bothered them. And then when they moved here and went to school, that bothered them. So I often see OCD has people focus on the things they care about the most. So, for instance, a lot of the people that I have with the harm OCD are the kindest, nicest, most gentle people. So, of course, being their brain telling them that they're going to harm someone is absolutely, it's hard for them to even fathom being that. So they're wanting to fight back against that. Naomi, I see that there are some good resources. You put that in the chat. I wanted to make sure that we got to those before we ended today. So thank you so much for that. I'll say the final word because I want to give you the final word. So before we go, I just want to say to everybody, thank you so much. I was reading the comments. Some people said some really kind things about my work situation. That's why I wanted to share with Naomi today, just to let you know, watching, that people do go through it. And like Naomi was talking about with her clients, like, unfortunately, it doesn't always go well, but luckily there's services to protect you. So thank you to everyone that said kind words, but asked questions, but also a lot of people support each other in the chat, and a lot of people shared their own work experience. And so I hope that this stream will help you, and all of the tools that Naomi is sharing with us will help. The only other announcements that I have is, don't forget, everyone, it's our week. Sunday, October 12th to Saturday, October 18th. It's OCD Awareness Week. The IOCDF will have plenty of resources for that. And don't forget that coming up, if you are a Spanish speaker, September 25th through the 26th, in person in Chile, and then virtually is the El Congreso Latino America de TOC, which is the Latin American OCD conference. But what I wanted for you to get the final word before we go, Naomi, any kind of final thoughts, final resources, what would you like to leave everybody watching that's struggling with mental health stigma, fighting to keep it together at work? Like, what's kind of like a final word or piece of hope that you could give everyone?
Oh, it's a lot of pressure to say one thing. I would say resources and support is available. a lot of people say you're not alone. I think that's important, but people can feel very lonely and alone in their experience. So I like to say, that help and support are available. And the fact, I'm so glad that you've been here today with us. Like the fact that you're here thinking about your experience, listening to us, you're spending the time and the energy to invest in yourself. And that is so important, and what it's all about, and just because you experience OCD symptoms, you experience them in the workplace, doesn't mean there's anything, wrong with you. I think one more thing I haven't necessarily talked about, like the context of work. A lot of folks can end up, because the context of work, generally speaking, is not set up for mental health conditions and for OCD, it can lead to a lot of internalization of like, is there something wrong with me? But absolutely not at all. There's something wrong with the environment, that it doesn't account for, a diversity of experiences. So I'll offer that up as a final thought. I hope it's helpful. I'm so glad we got to talk about this today. I'm so glad, Chris, for you inviting me here, sharing your experience. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I like what you said. It's the environment. I do. I feel like the environment, just like school, I look at a lot of clients with autism, with ADHD, with OCD, and the school environment is just not set up for them. So it is not a people problem. It's an environment problem. So I love how much you talked about it's not the person. So I hope beyond just the people getting the message about work, just that it's not you. You're doing your best, and we have a lot of ways to go with stigma. And yes, Rachel was able to share all of the resources in the chat. So if you're watching this on social media, the good thing is you can go, if you go to our Facebook, if you go to IOCF Facebook and you click on videos and you watch this stream back, all of the chat goes in there too. So the resources will be there and live there indefinitely. So I hope people take advantage of those. You give us some really good things to look at. So thank you so much, Naomi. It was super, super exciting to have you. Quick announcements about upcoming streams. We're here every Wednesday at 12 Eastern. Next week, we have a special one on perinatal OCD for Maternal Mental Health Week. On October 1st, on Wednesday, Liz McAville will be back, and it'll be the two of us answering your questions. The 8th, we're going to have a psychiatrist on to ask your med questions as well as clinical questions. And then Wednesday, the 15th of October, will be during OCD Awareness Week, and we'll have a special stream. Make sure to share this live stream with everyone. They can access it on our social media platforms where it's going to live. And then a final thank you once again to Naomi, the Mental Health Coalition, and everything that you're doing in the world of mental health. You've been great. So thank you so much for coming on by, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, Naomi.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Take care.